The stars twinkled in the vast emptiness of space as Captain Susan Miller stared through the viewscreen of the UES Dauntless. Her ship, once considered the pride of Earth's fleet, now seemed small and fragile. The massive alien vessels that had appeared at the edge of the solar system dwarfed anything humans had ever built. "Captain, they're broadcasting again," said Lieutenant Eric Powell, his fingers moving quickly over the communications panel. Susan nodded, her face calm despite the fear gripping her insides. "Put it through." The screen flickered, revealing a tall, gray-skinned figure with 4 yellow eyes arranged in a diamond pattern. The creature wore ornate armor that seemed to shimmer with an internal light. This was Supreme Commander Vorthak of the Zalari Empire, a name humanity had learned only 3 days ago. "Humans of Earth," the alien's voice rumbled through the translator. "Your time grows short. You have less than 2 of your Earth days remaining to submit to the Zalari Empire. Those who kneel will be permitted to live as servants. Those who resist will be erased." Susan clenched her jaw. "We're still considering your offer, Commander. Surely you understand that such a decision requires time." "Time is a luxury you do not have," Vorthak replied. "The Empire has conquered 17 star systems before yours. None have successfully resisted." The transmission cut off, leaving the bridge in silence. "Send the recording to Earth Command," Susan ordered, "and prepare the jump drive. We're heading back to Earth." As the Dauntless turned toward home, Susan retreated to her quarters. She studied the data they had collected on the Zalari ships. Their technology seemed to bend the laws of physics as humans understood them. The outer hulls absorbed rather than reflected light. Their weapons could tear through Earth's strongest shields like paper. Hours later, the Dauntless entered Earth orbit. Susan took a shuttle down to the Global Defense Council headquarters buried deep beneath the Rocky Mountains. The council chamber was filled with the most powerful people on Earth. Military leaders, scientists, and government officials all wore the same expression of barely contained panic. Admiral William Carter, a tall man with short gray hair and stern blue eyes, nodded to Susan as she entered. "Captain Miller, thank you for the data you've collected. It's concerning." "That's putting it mildly, sir," Susan replied, taking her seat at the large round table. Dr. Karen Woods, Earth's leading xenobiologist, stood up. Her dark skin contrasted with her white lab coat, and she pushed her glasses up as she addressed the room. "The Zalari are physiologically very different from humans," she explained, bringing up holographic images of the aliens. "They breathe an atmosphere with high levels of methane and sulfur. Their body chemistry is silicon-based rather than carbon-based. This gives them certain advantages but also potential vulnerabilities." Admiral Carter leaned forward. "What kind of vulnerabilities?" "Their environmental suits and life support systems are designed to maintain very specific conditions," Karen said. "If we could disrupt those systems, we might have a chance." General Frank Morrison, head of the Global Infantry, slammed his fist on the table. "What chance? You've all seen their ships. We should surrender now and save lives." "We don't." "Kneel," Admiral Carter said firmly. "We never have." The room fell silent. Susan spoke up. "There's a research facility in Arizona working on experimental defense technology. My science officer mentioned it before I came here. Something about programmable matter." Admiral Carter pulled up the file on his tablet. "Project Dust. It was deemed too dangerous for deployment. The researcher in charge is Jason Phillips." "Get him here," Susan said. "Now." 6 hours later, Jason Phillips stood before the council. He was younger than Susan expected, maybe 30, with nervous hands and tired eyes. He carried a small metal case. "Mr. Phillips," Admiral Carter said, "tell us about Project Dust." Jason placed the case on the table and opened it. Inside was what looked like a container of fine gray powder. "This isn't ordinary dust," Jason explained in a quiet voice. "These are microscopic machines, nanites. Each one is programmed to identify specific molecular structures and break them down." "Break them down?" Susan asked. "Dismantle them at the UOCR molecular level," Jason nodded. "They were originally designed for waste management, breaking down toxic materials, But the program was shut down when the nanites showed signs of evolving, adapting their programming. Karen Woods approached the case, studying the gray powder. Could they be programmed to target Zilari technology or biology? Jason hesitated. Theoretically, yes. If we had samples to work with, I could program them to identify and break down specific Zilari molecular patterns. But there's a risk. Once released, these nanites self-replicate. They could spread beyond our control. Admiral Carter's face was grim. What choice do we have? It's this or extinction. The discussion continued through the night. Plans were made, contingencies discussed. By morning, the council had reached a decision. They would not surrender to the Zilari. They would fight. Susan was tasked with leading a strike team. Their mission, capture a Zilari soldier to obtain biological samples for Jason's nanites. As she prepared to leave the bunker, Admiral Carter pulled her aside. Captain Miller, this mission, the odds aren't good. Susan checked her weapon. I know, sir. If you succeed, it could save humanity. If you fail... He trailed off. We won't fail, Susan said with more confidence than she felt. Across the globe, Earth's military forces mobilized. The few starships humanity possessed took up defensive positions around the planet. Ground forces prepared anti-orbital batteries, though all simulations showed they would be ineffective against Zilari weapons. In cities worldwide, civilians received emergency broadcasts. Some fled to rural areas, others gathered in shelters. Many simply stayed home, holding loved ones close as they watched the skies. The Zilari response came sooner than expected. As Susan's team prepared to launch, alarms blared throughout the base. They're here, shouted a communications officer. Multiple Zilari ships entering atmosphere. Susan raced to the command center. On the main screen, she watched as massive Zilari vessels descended through the clouds above major cities. Smaller craft swarmed out like insects from a disturbed hive. They didn't even wait the full 3 days, Susan murmured. Admiral Carter stood steady beside her. They never intended to. It was just to see if we'd break. The first attacks hit military installations across the globe. The Dauntless, still in orbit, managed to fire a single volley before being torn apart by Zilari weapons. Launch all remaining ships, Carter ordered, and get that strike team moving. Now! Susan gathered her team. Their mission had changed. No longer would they try to capture a Zilari. Now they needed to infiltrate one of the landing craft. As they boarded their stealth shuttle, Susan looked back at the command center. She knew many of them wouldn't survive the day. For Earth, she said quietly, sealing her helmet. The shuttle doors closed, and they launched into the chaos of humanity's first interstellar war. The stealth shuttle raced through the chaos of Earth's atmosphere. Susan and her 5-person team watched in horror as Zilari ships rained destruction on cities below. Las Vegas was already a smoking crater. Parts of Beijing were on fire. The aliens had targeted military installations first, but now they struck civilian centers without mercy. This isn't a war, whispered Sam Lewis, the team's weapons expert. It's extermination. Susan kept her eyes forward. Stay focused. We have a mission. Their shuttle was heading for a massive Zilari vessel that had landed in the Nevada desert. The alien ship looked like a giant metal insect, with 6 leg-like structures supporting its main body. It had become a forward base for the invaders. We've got Zilari fighters on our 6, called Natalie Green, their pilot. Her hands moved quickly over the controls as she took the shuttle into a steep dive. 3 small alien craft followed, firing strange weapons that left trails of purple light. One blast grazed their wing. Hold on! Natalie shouted, pulling the shuttle into a canyon. They weaved between rock walls, the alien ship still in pursuit. I'm going to try something, Natalie said through gritted teeth. She cut power to the engines and dropped the shuttle into a narrow side canyon. The Zilari ships shot past overhead. The team sat in silence, barely breathing, as their craft settled in the shadows. That was too close, said Eric Powell, who had joined the mission from the Dauntless. How are we supposed to get into that ship now? Susan pulled up a holographic map. We're about 3 miles from the Zalari base. We go on foot from here. They gathered their equipment. Each person carried a plasma rifle and body armor, plus Jason's special container of experimental nanites. Remember, Susan told them, we need to reach the life support systems. That's where the nanites will do the most damage. The Nevada sun beat down as they hiked across the desert. They stayed low, using rocky outcroppings for cover. Twice they had to hide as Zalari patrols passed overhead. Miles away across the globe, other humans fought their own battles. In Boston, former Marine Olivia Grant led a group of survivors through the ruins of downtown. They had just blown up a Zalari ground transport, buying time for hundreds of civilians to escape through the subway tunnels. They bleed, Olivia told, her fighters pointing to the greenish fluid leaking from a dead Zalari soldier. If they bleed, we can kill them. In Mumbai, programmer Daniel Harris worked frantically in a basement surrounded by computers. The Zalari had knocked out most satellite communications, but Daniel had created a network using old radio technology and repurposed cell towers. I've got contact with resistance cells in 14 countries, he told the small group gathered around him. They all report the same thing. The Zalari are rounding up humans. For what purpose? Asked an older woman clutching a first aid kit. Unknown, Daniel replied, but no one who gets taken has been seen again. Back in Nevada, Susan's team reached the perimeter of the Zalari base. Alien soldiers patrolled the area, their environmental suits giving them a bulky appearance. Each carried a weapon that looked like a living thing, with tubes and pulsing lights. There's our way in, Susan whispered, pointing to a small access port on the underside of the ship. It looks like a maintenance entrance. How do we get past the guards? Asked Sam. Susan pulled out a small device Jason had given her. Distraction, she activated the device and threw it half a mile away. It exploded in a brilliant flash of light and sound. Most of the Zalari guards moved toward the explosion. Now, Susan ordered, and the team sprinted for the ship. They reached the access port, just as an alarm began to sound. Eric quickly attached a device to the alien lock, and after a tense 30 seconds, the door slid open. The inside of the Zalari ship was strange and unsettling. The corridors were oddly shaped, with uneven floors and ceilings. The lighting pulsed, in a rhythm that made the humans' eyes hurt. The air smelled of chemicals that their suits filtered out. Life support should be central to the ship, Susan said, consulting a rough map they had created from orbital scans. This way. They moved carefully through the alien vessel, hiding whenever Zalari troops passed by. The ship seemed to be in constant motion with walls that shifted and changed. Twice they had to backtrack when passages closed unexpectedly. Captain, Sam whispered, pointing ahead. I think that's what we're looking for. They had reached a large chamber filled with transparent tubes and pulsing machinery. Misty vapor cycled through the tubes and control panels glowed with alien symbols. This is it, Susan agreed. Jason said the nanites need to be introduced directly into their air circulation system. As Eric and Sam set up a perimeter, Susan and Natalie approached the central control unit. Susan removed the container of gray dust from her pack. Once we release these, there's no going back, she said. Natalie looked at the complex alien machinery. How do we even connect to their systems? Before Susan could answer, a door slid open on the far side of the chamber. 4 Zalari soldiers entered, their weapons raised. Down! Susan shouted, pulling Natalie behind a piece of equipment. Plasma fire erupted from both sides. The alien weapons fired streams of energy that melted metal where they hit. Sam was struck in the arm and fell, back, his suit smoking. Eric managed to hit one of the Zalari. The alien suit ruptured and it collapsed, making strange gurgling sounds as it was exposed to Earth's atmosphere. We need to hurry, Susan called. She turned to the control unit and attached the container of nanites. But she couldn't figure out how to open the alien system. Natalie fired continuously, keeping the remaining Zalari at bay. Whatever you're going to do, do it fast. In desperation, Susan fired her plasma rifle directly at the control unit. The panel exploded, creating a breach in the system. She quickly opened the nanite container and poured the gray powder into the damaged machinery. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the gray dust seemed to come alive, spreading through the damaged panel and into the tubes beyond. Where it touched, alien technology, the material began to crumble. "It's working," Susan said. "Let's get out of here." They grabbed Sam and retreated the way they had come. Behind them, alarms blared with increased urgency. They could hear the sound of metal falling apart, like sand running through an hourglass. As they ran through the corridors, they saw Zalari soldiers collapse, their suits and then their bodies, turning to gray dust. Walls began to crumble around them. The ship itself was coming apart. "Faster," Susan urged as they approached the exit. "This whole place is going to collapse." They burst out of the access port into the desert sun. Behind them, the massive Zalari ship was folding in on itself, sections turning to dust and falling away. "Keep moving," Susan ordered. They ran until they reached a safe distance, then turned to watch. Where the imposing alien vessel had stood, there was now only a giant pile of gray dust still settling in the desert wind. Word of the Nevada victory spread quickly through Daniel's makeshift communication network. Susan Miller became an instant hero as images of the collapsed Zalari ship reached resistance fighters worldwide. "It works," Susan told Admiral Carter when they finally reconnected. She stood at the edge of what was now being called the dust field, a vast area of fine gray powder that had once been a mighty alien warship. The nanites broke down their technology and their biology. The whole ship just fell apart. Admiral Carter's face on the small communication screen looked both relieved and troubled. "We're seeing similar reports from around the globe. Resistance fighters who captured your footage are using jury-rigged weapons to deploy the nanite samples we distributed. 6 more Zalari ships have been neutralized in the past 12 hours. "Then we're winning," Susan said, hardly believing it. "Maybe," Carter replied. "But we've lost contact with the East Coast and Jason Phillips has concerns about the nanites." Susan frowned. "What kind of concerns?" "He says they're adapting faster than expected, evolving. He wants to meet with you at the Rocky Mountain bunker." 3 days later, Susan arrived at the underground facility. The journey had been dangerous. Zalari patrols were everywhere, seemingly desperate to stop the spread of the nanite weapon. Half of her team hadn't made it. Jason Phillips looked worse than when she'd last seen him. His eyes were sunken with exhaustion, his hands shaking as he showed her the latest data. The nanites were programmed to target specific Zalari molecular patterns, he explained, pointing to microscope images on a screen, but they're becoming more aggressive, identifying similar patterns in other materials. "What does that mean?" Susan asked. "It means they're starting to affect certain Earth technologies too, especially newer alloys and compounds that share structural similarities with Zalari tech." Admiral Carter joined them, accompanied by Dr. Karen Woods. "We've lost Boston," Carter said without preamble. "Not to the Zalari, to the nanites. After Olivia Grant's team deployed them against the Zalari ground force, the nanites spread to the city infrastructure. Buildings started collapsing. Technology stopped working." Karen stepped forward. "The good news is that the nanites don't affect living Earth organisms. Our biology is too different from the Zalari, but they're devastating to technology." Susan felt a cold knot in her stomach. "So we're trading one apocalypse for another." "We need to develop a countermeasure," Jason said. "Something to deactivate the nanites once they've done their job." "How long would that take?" Carter asked. Jason shook his head. "Weeks, maybe months. And that's if I had access to proper facilities, which I don't anymore." Their conversation was interrupted by an alarm. One of the technicians called out, "Sir, we're detecting multiple Zalari ships entering the atmosphere. It's their main fleet." On the central screen, they watched as dozens of massive vessels descended toward Earth. Unlike the earlier ships, these were clearly designed for one purpose: planetary bombardment. "They're going to glass the planet," Karen whispered. "Admiral." Carter's face hardened. "Not if we can help it." "Susan, how much of the original nanite sample do we have left?" 3 containers, she replied. "But if we use them and can't control the spread, Earth dead by Zalari or Earth reduced to pre-industrial technology," Carter cut in. "Not much of a choice, but it is a choice." He turned to the communications officer. Get me Daniel Harris in Mumbai and Olivia Grant if she made it out of Boston. I want every resistance cell coordinating for a simultaneous strike against the new Zalari fleet. The plan came together quickly. The Zalari fleet had positioned ships over major cities worldwide, preparing for the final assault. Each resistance cell would target one ship, using the remaining nanite samples and improvised delivery systems. Susan would lead the most critical mission, an attack on the Zalari command vessel, hovering over what remained of Washington, D.C. "This is our last shot," Carter told the assembled strike teams via video link. "If we fail, humanity ends today. If we succeed, we'll deal with the consequences tomorrow." Susan's new team included Olivia Grant, who had escaped Boston with a handful of survivors, and Daniel Harris, who had designed a special delivery system for the nanites. "It doesn't just release them," Daniel explained during the flight to D.C. "It supercharges them, making them replicate faster and spread wider." Olivia checked her weapons with practiced hands. "After what I saw in Boston, these things scare me more than the Zalari." "They should," Susan admitted. "But right now, they're our only hope." Their approach to the Zalari command ship was more direct than the Nevada mission. With humanity facing extinction, stealth was less important than speed. They took a military transport directly toward the massive vessel, dodging alien fire. "They know we're coming," Olivia said, as plasma blasts rocked their ship. Daniel worked frantically at his console. "I'm picking up a signal from the Zalari ship. They're broadcasting on all frequencies." He activated the speaker, and Supreme Commander Vorthak's voice filled the cabin. "Humans of Earth, your resistance has cost you dearly. Now you will witness the price of defiance. Your world burns today." As if to emphasize his words, one of the nearby Zalari ships fired a massive energy beam at the ground below. Where it struck, the Earth turned molten red, then black. 3 minutes to intercept," the pilot called. Susan moved to the deployment bay with Olivia and Daniel. The nanite delivery device looked like a large missile with strange modifications. "Once we're within range, we launch this directly at their central hull," Susan explained. "The impact should breach their outer defenses, and the nanites will do the rest." The ship rocked violently as they took a direct hit. Warning lights flashed throughout the cabin. "We're losing engine control," the pilot shouted. Susan made a split-second decision. "Ram them," she ordered. "Captain?" the pilot questioned. "You heard me. Full speed, direct impact with their command section." Daniel and Olivia exchanged looks but said nothing. They all knew what this meant. "It's been an honor," the pilot said, then pushed the throttle forward. Their transport accelerated toward the Zalari vessel, taking more hits as they approached. Systems failed around them. The cabin began to decompress. Susan held onto the nanite delivery device, programming the final activation sequence. "For Earth," she said, meeting Olivia's and Daniel's eyes one last time. Their ship struck the Zalari command vessel with tremendous force. The impact tore through the alien hull, exposing its interior to their attack. In the moment before their transport broke apart, Susan activated the nanite device. The explosion spread a cloud of gray dust throughout the breach. For a moment, nothing seemed to happen. Then, slowly at first, but with increasing speed, the massive Zalari ship began to decay. Sections crumbled away. The ominous glow of its weapons faded. From the ground, survivors watched in awe as the giant alien vessel dissolved into a rain of gray powder that drifted down like ash. Across the globe, other resistance teams reported similar success. The Zalari fleet was turning to dust before their eyes. But as Admiral Carter watched from the Rocky Mountain bunker, he knew that humanity's victory would come at a terrible cost. Above Denver, a cloud of gray nanites was spreading, visibly from a destroyed Zalari ship, drifting toward the city below. 1 month after the destruction of the Zalari fleet, Admiral William Carter stood at the window of the Rocky Mountain bunker, looking out at a changed world. Snow fell gently on the pine trees outside, but it wasn't the weather that had transformed Earth. The nanites had spread far beyond their intended targets. As Jason Phillips had feared, they had evolved, seeking out and destroying technologies with even the slightest molecular similarity to Zalari materials. First, the newest electronics had failed. Then power grids collapsed. Communication systems went silent. Even simple machinery began to deteriorate when the nanite clouds drifted through cities and towns. "Admiral," a young lieutenant said from the doorway, "Dr. Woods is ready with her report." Carter nodded and followed the lieutenant to the conference room. Only half the lights worked, powered by specially shielded generators. Karen Woods stood at the head of the table, surrounded by papers and hand-drawn maps. "The nanite contamination has reached every continent," she began without preamble. "North America is the hardest hit. Europe and Asia have significant affected zones, particularly around former Zolari landing sites." "Casualties?" Carter asked. "Minimal direct casualties," Karen replied. "The nanites don't affect organic matter, but the secondary effects of technological collapse are another story. We've lost hospitals, water treatment facilities, food distribution networks." An older man with a thick beard spoke up. He was Dr. Alan Wright, one of the few scientists who had predicted the nanite spread. "We estimate that up to 50% of Earth's population will face severe hardship this winter without power or modern infrastructure." Carter ran a hand over his face. "What about containment? Jason's countermeasure?" Karen shook her head. "Jason didn't make it. His final notes show he was close to developing a neutralizing agent. But the lab in Denver was hit by the nanite cloud before he could complete it. So we've saved humanity from alien conquest, only to send ourselves back to the Stone Age," Carter said bitterly. "Not quite that far back," Karen corrected. "The nanites primarily affect advanced technology. Simple machines, basic combustion engines, older analog systems, they're mostly untouched. And we've found that certain electromagnetic fields can repel the nanites, creating safe zones." Carter looked at the map on the table. Small circles marked these safe zones, areas where specialized equipment generated fields that kept the nanites at bay. There were perhaps 30 worldwide, mostly around military installations and research facilities that had been prepared for the worst. "What about Susan Miller?" Carter asked. "Any word?" Karen and Dr. Wright exchanged looks. "Her transport crashed directly into the Zolari command ship," Karen said gently. "There were no survivors." Carter closed his eyes briefly. "She saved us. All." "And Olivia Grant? Daniel Harris?" "Both lost in the same mission," Karen confirmed. A messenger entered the room and handed Carter a note. He read it quickly, his expression changing. "The president is alive," he announced. "She's established a temporary government in the St. Louis safe zone." This was the first piece of good news in weeks. The room filled with murmurs of relief. "What are her orders?" Karen asked. "She's calling it the Reconstruction Initiative." Carter read, "Each safe zone is to focus on 3 priorities: expanding their protective fields, developing technology that resists nanite deterioration, and preserving essential knowledge." Dr. Wright nodded approvingly. "Smart. We can't fight the nanites directly yet, but we can learn to live with them until we find a permanent solution." Over the next 6 months, humanity adapted to its new reality. The safe zones grew slowly, as engineers found ways to extend the protective fields. Some zones connected, forming larger areas where technology could function normally. Outside these protected regions, people returned to simpler ways of living. Horse-drawn carts replaced cars. Wind and water mills generated mechanical power. Handwritten letters carried by runners became a primary form of communication between settlements. Carter traveled between safe zones, coordinating the growing network of protected areas. During a visit to what had once been Silicon Valley, now one of the largest safe zones on the West Coast, he received unexpected news. "Admiral," a technician called, running to catch him as he inspected the perimeter defenses. "We've picked up something on the long-range scanners." Carter followed the young woman to a monitoring station. The equipment was crude by pre-war standards, but effective enough. "It appeared at the edge of the solar system 12 hours ago," the technician explained, pointing to a blinking dot on the screen. "It's not Zolari design. Actually, it doesn't match anything in our databases." Carter studied the readings. "Have they made contact?" "Yes, sir. They're broadcasting on all frequencies, The message is in multiple languages, including English. Let me hear it, Carter ordered. The technician pressed a button, and a strange, melodic voice filled the room. People of Earth, we are the Ardani, cooperative. We have monitored your conflict with the Zalari Empire. We come in peace and offer assistance. Your victory has changed the balance of power in this sector of the galaxy. Carter's eyes widened. They're aliens? More aliens? It appears so, sir, the technician replied. But unlike the Zalari, they're staying at the edge of the system, waiting for permission to approach. What do they want? Carter wondered aloud. As if in response, the message continued. The weapon you deployed against the Zalari, what our scientists call molecular deconstruction technology, is unknown to other civilizations. Many races have fallen to the Empire. None have succeeded in defeating them until now. We wish to establish diplomatic relations and offer technological assistance to help you recover from the war. Carter sat heavily in a nearby chair. They want our nanite technology, sir, the technician said cautiously. They're also transmitting technical specifications for a device they claim can neutralize the nanites. Carter looked up sharply. What? They say they've studied the gray dust from orbit and developed a countermeasure. They're offering it as a gesture of goodwill. Carter stared at the blinking dot on the screen, representing the alien ship waiting patiently at the edge of their solar system. Send a message to all safe zones, he ordered after a long pause. Priority 1. We have first contact with a new alien species, and this time we're negotiating from a position of strength. The technician nodded and began typing the message. Outside the safe zone's boundaries, a cloud of gray nanites drifted. On the wind, slowly breaking down the remnants of a collapsed building. The dust that had saved humanity from one threat while creating another might now become its greatest asset in a galaxy, suddenly aware of the small blue planet and the species that had turned an empire to dust. 5 years passed since the day the Ardani ships first appeared at the edge of Earth's solar system. The world had changed in ways no one could have imagined before the Zalari invasion. Admiral William Carter, now known simply as Director Carter of the Earth Reconstruction Authority, stood on a hilltop overlooking what people called New Denver. The city gleamed in the morning sun, protected by a dome of shimmering energy that kept the nanites at bay. Similar domes now covered 200 locations worldwide, each one a center of rebuilding. Beautiful view, said a voice behind him. Carter turned to see Leah, the Ardani ambassador. Her species looked almost human except for their silver-tinted skin and large almond-shaped eyes that shifted colors with their emotions. Today, Leah's eyes were a peaceful blue. I never thought we'd come this far in just 5 years, Carter admitted. The Ardani had kept their promise. They provided the technology to neutralize the nanites within controlled areas, allowing humans to rebuild their civilization in protected zones. They did not demand the nanite weapon in return, but instead proposed a peaceful alliance. Your people are remarkably resilient, Leah said. Most species would have surrendered to the Zalari. None have ever managed to defeat them and then recover so quickly from the aftermath. Carter smiled slightly. We're stubborn that way. They walked together toward the city center, where a ceremony was about to begin. Today marked the opening of Earth's first faster-than-light ship, built with Ardani assistance but largely of human design. Have you named it yet? Leah asked. Carter nodded. The Susan Miller, after the captain who led the mission that turned the tide against the Zalari. A fitting tribute. As they neared the main square, Carter saw Dr. Karen Woods waiting for them. Now head of Earth's Science Division, Karen had led the team that successfully contained and eventually neutralized the remaining nanite clouds in Earth's atmosphere. Director, Ambassador, she greeted them. They're waiting for you at the platform. Thousands of people had gathered in the square. Some wore the uniform of the Reconstruction Authority. Others were in civilian clothes. Children sat on parents' shoulders for a better view. Karen lowered her voice. We just received word from the Deep Space Monitoring Station. Another Zalari fleet has been detected at the edge of the Ardani home system. Carter's face darkened. How many ships? twice the size of the fleet that attacked Earth. They seem to be gathering forces from across their remaining territory. Leah's eyes flashed yellow with concern. They seek revenge. First against us for allying with you, then they will come here again. Carter nodded grimly. But this time, we'll be ready. The Zalari Empire had been weakened but not destroyed by their defeat at Earth. The survivors had retreated to their core systems, rebuilding their forces and adapting their technology to resist the nanite weapon. Carter, Karen, and Leah reached the platform where Earth's new leadership council waited. The ship stood behind them, sleek and powerful, ready for its maiden voyage. The Council President Maria Ortiz stepped forward to address the crowd. 5 years ago, humanity faced extinction. The Zalari Empire demanded that we kneel or burn. We chose neither. Instead, we turned our enemies to dust. The crowd cheered. But our victory came at a great cost, Maria continued. The weapon that saved us also destroyed much of what we had built. We faced a future without the technology we had come to depend on. She gestured to the Ardani delegation. Then came new friends from the stars, not conquerors like the Zalari, but allies who offered help without demanding submission. Leah nodded respectfully. Today we launched the first ship of Earth's new fleet, a ship that will carry the best of humanity to the stars. Not to conquer, not to demand that others kneel, but to explore and to defend both our world and our allies from those who would threaten our freedom. The crowd roared its approval. Carter watched the ceremony with mixed emotions. He was proud of how far they had come, but worried about the challenges ahead. The Zalari would return, stronger and more determined than before. After the speeches, Carter joined Karen and a small team of scientists in a secure laboratory beneath the city. Here, carefully contained behind multiple protective barriers, a sample of the original nanite dust was kept for study. Show me, Carter said. Karen activated a display screen. Microscopic images appeared, showing the nanites at work breaking down a piece of recovered Zalari technology. We've finally decoded their complete programming structure, Karen explained. The way they identify target materials, how they replicate, and most importantly, how they evolve. Can we control them now? Carter asked. Better than that, Karen replied. We can direct their evolution, tell them exactly which molecular structures to target and which to ignore. She pointed to another screen showing a simulation. This version would only affect Zalari weapon systems, leaving their life support and engines intact. Disarming them without killing them. Carter nodded. The council will approve. There's more, Karen said. The Ardani scientists helped us understand something we missed before. The nanites don't just destroy, they transform. The dust they create can be reprogrammed and reconstructed into new forms. She pressed a button, and a small cube of gray dust in a containment field began to shift and reform, taking the shape of a complex mechanical device. Limitless construction material, Carter breathed. This could rebuild our world faster than we ever imagined. And defend it, Karen added. The Zalari may have adapted their ships to resist the original nanites, but they won't be prepared for what we've created now. As Carter left the laboratory, he looked up at the stars beginning to appear in the evening sky. Somewhere out there, the Zalari were planning their revenge. They still believed that all other species should kneel or burn, but humans had proven them wrong once and they would do so again. The species that had turned an empire to dust would not be conquered. The next day, the Susan Miller departed on its maiden voyage, carrying Earth's diplomats to meet with other worlds that had lived under Zalari threat. Where once the Zalari had demanded submission, now humans offered alliance, sharing their hard-won knowledge of how to resist tyranny. The message spread quickly through the galaxy. A small blue world had changed everything. The age of kneeling to empires was over.